In this episode, we're going to slow down and deliberately reinforce one of the most exam-relevant skills for the GISF: fast and accurate recall of core acronyms. Acronyms can either be your shortcut to clarity or your source of confusion under pressure. When you see a question that includes SIEM, EDR, XSS, CSRF, or API, you should not pause to decode letters one by one. You should immediately connect the acronym to its core function, risk area, or control domain. The purpose of this lesson is not to create a giant list to memorize mechanically. It is to build clean mental associations so that when you hear or read an acronym, you instantly recall what problem it addresses and where it fits in the larger security model. Think of this as a spoken reference pass through high-yield terms that commonly appear in foundational security discussions. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Let's begin with foundational governance and risk acronyms. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three principles describe what security ultimately protects. Confidentiality means preventing unauthorized access to information. Integrity means preventing unauthorized modification. Availability means ensuring systems and data are accessible when needed. When you see a question describing exposed data, that is primarily a confidentiality issue. When you see tampered records, that is integrity. When systems are offline due to attack, that is availability. Risk is often framed as likelihood multiplied by impact. Even if not shown as an acronym in the question, this logic underpins risk evaluation. IAM stands for Identity and Access Management, and it connects directly to authentication and authorization controls across systems. Now move into defensive technologies. SIEM, or Security Information and Event Management, centralizes logs and correlates events to produce actionable alerts. If a question mentions log aggregation, correlation, or centralized monitoring, SIEM is often involved. EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, focuses on behavioral visibility on individual devices, such as process activity and file changes. NDR, Network Detection and Response, focuses on traffic patterns and communication between systems. XDR, Extended Detection and Response, represents the idea of correlating signals across endpoints, networks, and other layers for a broader picture. When you see layered visibility and correlation across domains, think in terms of these detection technologies working together. Now shift to web security acronyms, which frequently appear in foundational exams. XSS, cross-site scripting, involves injecting malicious scripts into web pages viewed by other users. CSRF, cross-site request forgery, tricks a user's browser into sending unintended requests while authenticated. SQL injection refers to manipulating database queries through unvalidated input. API, Application Programming Interface, refers to programmatic endpoints that must enforce strong authentication and authorization just like visible web pages. HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, indicates encrypted web traffic. When you see a scenario involving untrusted input, improper output encoding, or missing request validation, think immediately of these web vulnerability acronyms and what category of risk they represent. Authentication and access control acronyms are also high yield. MFA, multi-factor authentication, requires more than one form of verification. SSO, single sign-on, allows one login to access multiple services. RBAC, role-based access control, assigns permissions based on roles rather than individuals. ABAC, attribute-based access control, uses attributes like department or location to determine permissions. PAM, privileged access management, focuses on controlling and monitoring high-privilege accounts. When you see a question describing broad access misuse, think RBAC or least privilege. When you see repeated login attempts or bypass of single-factor authentication, think of MFA as a control. Cloud and SaaS concepts also carry common acronyms. IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, means the provider manages hardware while the customer manages operating systems and above. PaaS, Platform as a Service, shifts more responsibility to the provider but still leaves configuration and identity with the customer. SaaS, Software as a Service, delivers the application fully managed, but customers still manage users and data. IoT, Internet of Things, refers to connected devices that require isolation, updates, and monitoring. API keys and tokens function as credentials for integrations. When you see questions about shared responsibility, access misconfiguration, or overly permissive storage, connect them to these service models. Incident response acronyms are also central. IOC, Indicators of Compromise, are specific clues like hashes or IP addresses suggesting compromise. TTP, Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures, represent higher-level attacker behaviors that are harder to change. C2, Command and Control, describes attacker communication channels. DLP, Data Loss Prevention, focuses on preventing unauthorized data exfiltration. RTO, Recovery Time Objective, defines acceptable downtime after disruption. When you see an exam question contrasting simple indicators with behavior-based detection, remember the pyramid of pain and the relative durability of TTP compared to IOC. Encryption and key management acronyms also appear frequently. AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, is a common symmetric encryption algorithm. RSA is a widely known asymmetric encryption algorithm. PKI, Public Key Infrastructure, supports digital certificates and trust relationships. TLS, Transport Layer Security, protects data in transit. KMS, Key Management Service, refers to managing encryption keys securely in cloud environments. When a question mentions protecting data in transit versus at rest, associate TLS with transit and encryption standards like AES with stored data. When key compromise is described, think about KMS and rotation practices. Monitoring and governance acronyms round out the list. SOC, Security Operations Center, is responsible for monitoring and incident response. GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance, covers policy and regulatory alignment. DLP, mentioned earlier, supports data protection enforcement. VPN, Virtual Private Network, secures remote access connections. DNS, Domain Name System, translates names to IP addresses and can be abused in attacks. When you see scenarios about centralized oversight, policy enforcement, or regulatory reporting, think GRC. When remote access is described, consider VPN controls and authentication. The most important strategy for acronym mastery is association, not rote memorization. When you hear EDR, think endpoint behavior visibility. When you hear SIEM, think log correlation and centralized monitoring. When you hear XSS, think malicious script injection in browsers. When you hear MFA, think layered authentication factors. By attaching each acronym to its core purpose, you reduce cognitive load during the exam. Instead of translating letters, you immediately recall function. This is especially important under time pressure, when decoding acronyms can waste precious seconds. Another helpful tactic is grouping acronyms by domain. Identity and access acronyms cluster together. Detection acronyms cluster together. Web vulnerability acronyms cluster together. Cloud service acronyms cluster together. This clustering strengthens memory pathways. If you see a question about cloud misconfiguration, your brain should automatically scan the cluster of cloud and identity acronyms. If you see a question about malicious browser behavior, your brain should scan the web vulnerability cluster. Retrieval becomes faster when knowledge is organized conceptually rather than alphabetically. Finally, remember that exam questions often test understanding, not expansion. You are rarely asked to spell out what an acronym stands for. You are asked what it does, what risk it addresses, or which control aligns with a scenario. Therefore, your mental recall should prioritize function and context. Acronyms are shorthand for entire concepts. When you hear the letters, you should see the scenario type they represent. That clarity is what turns acronyms from obstacles into tools. By the end of this lesson, you should feel more comfortable hearing common security acronyms and instantly connecting them to their purpose within governance, detection, web security, identity, cloud, encryption, and incident response domains. The decision rule to remember is this. When you encounter an acronym on the exam, immediately map it to its core function and risk area before analyzing answer choices, so you interpret the question through the correct conceptual lens.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.